Once again, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us for another Tuesday Freelance Focus session. My name is Alex Hillman, along with my counterpart Catherine Sontag. We've been hosting these events all throughout quarantine and continuing them on sort of the continuation of the Philly Freelance Fest, which we held back at the end of January with the goal of bringing together the regional freelance community, helping freelancers get better at what they do, get better at the business parts around the creative skills that you already have. And so we've been building these sessions sort of around the responses to what you have told us, what you and people like you have told us you're challenged with the most, you're trying to get better at, you're trying to make use of this time to improve, or you think might unlock the next level of opportunity. And obviously you're trying to find folks who can help us adapt these topics to the current situation we're in, and give you the introduction that you need to be able to apply some of these new skills, these new ideas right away. So we're excited to be bringing you yet another one. This is with Liz Borchert. Liz, did I get your last name correctly?
You did. Yes, you did.
Yes, Catherine assisted me on that one. I was like, I'm going to get this wrong if I don't ask.
I appreciate you asking.
I know Liz, and you might know Liz from her work on the Lunch Club, which is a sort of regional community of freelancers getting together, having lunch together, professional and social conversations over lunch for those of us who work from home, work wherever we are. Now we all work from home, but Liz is a branding and design expert, and so she reached out and offered to take you through some of the lessons that you can apply. You can DIY some of your own improvements and make you and yourself, your brand, appear a bit more professional, look a little bit nicer, look more consistent, things like that. So I'm going to hand this over to Liz in just a moment. A couple of super quick housekeeping things. Obviously, we're going to run this through the hour. Liz has a presentation to go through, as well as some interactive exercises, but we are going to be having a good amount of time near the end for your questions as well. So that chat room where everyone's been introducing themselves is a great place for you to toss a question. Liz might not answer it right away, but when she gets to the Q&A time, she is going to come back and work through those questions. So the text box, the chat box, is your spot for questions. Questions are warmly welcome. They're encouraged. Want to try and make this interactive. We're here to serve you, and that includes Liz. So without further ado, Liz, I'll turn it over to you, let you introduce yourself, introduce the session. Thank you so much for being here and sharing with our community today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And like Alex said, I got introduced to the group through the Freelance Fest. That was great, kind of getting a bigger picture on what Philly is and what the freelance scene is, bigger than what, as Alex mentioned, the Lunch Club was. I kind of started that on a whim without realizing there were so many other independent people here in the city. So yeah, happy just to give back a little bit. And after seeing a couple of these talks, wanting to kind of dive in and get my hands dirty as well and share what I had to say. So without further ado, can I share the screen now? It says that someone else is sharing at the moment.
Oh, that's because I'm sharing the sound. Hang on one second.
Oh, perfect.
All right, I'm done. That's in my notes to stop sharing music when I'm done sharing music.
Scrubs is gone. Good test. All right, so yeah, I'm going to go through a brief presentation on branding. For those of you who are familiar with design and branding, this may be a little bit of a recurring kind of noise to you, but it's a good touch up to just kind of listen and learn a little bit. A lot of what I'm definitely going to say is geared towards people who are looking for some guidance on either how to start working with a designer if you've never worked with someone professionally, or some tips that you can take on doing this on your own. So hopefully you can make your own designs and have your business, however it is, look as best as it can and look as professional as it can. Or when seeking out a professional, some of the questions you might want to ask them and things you might need help on to get started. At the end, hopefully I can pace this out right, so that way by the end we'll have time for some questions. If you guys have any specific questions on your brand in particular, on things you want to achieve, things you need a second eye on, second opinion on, we kind of all agreed that it'd be nice to get down to some specifics at the end. So feel free to ask any really particular questions about something that you're struggling with, and we can use the rest of the time to go through a couple and hopefully get some things answered. All right, so just to dive into a little bit, for those of you who don't know me, I've seen a couple familiar faces in the chat, but if I haven't met you before, I'm originally from New Jersey, worked across the country between California and New York at various agencies, eventually ending up in Philadelphia a couple years ago to work for myself. I've been working independently with small businesses and startups for a few years now, and I honestly absolutely love it. I love the gratification you get about working one-on-one with someone's ideas and their process and getting to see that come to fruition. I felt personally working at kind of a bigger scale, I lacked a little bit of that connection. So it's been nice to get to know the community on different levels and get to know small business owners on a deeper level as well through design. Okay, so one of the bigger points that I really want to drive home today is making sure that you all come away with knowing that branding expands or extends far beyond just a logo and just what people perceive design to be. Design is every touch point that you see in every piece of marketing and honestly anything you really see that's had thought put into it out of the construction of the materials. If done right, if a branding project and process has been well executed and well thought through from the beginning, you'll be able to take any of the pieces that you need to create, whether it's packaging design or app design, web design, email marketing, stationery materials, promotional materials, and work those through to the end and have it look really seamless. These are just a few examples of things that I've worked on just to kind of show you some capabilities, you know, everything from packaging to UI, UX, web design, things like that. All definitely stems from the choices that you make from the very beginning. So working on the colors and the fonts, small graphic decisions, things like that go a lot into the pieces that come into play throughout. Okay, so quickly diving into what is in a brand, again, reiterating that it's so much more than just a logo. It's about kind of shaping these pieces that come together and making sure that people understand what's going on inside your head, and then that will come out through visually. Some metaphor that I use from time to time is try imagining if someone comes to you and they say, hey, here's my credit card, I want you to go to the mall later and go shopping for me, without any indication of who they are, where they're going later, what they need the outfit for. It's really hard to know what to go buy. Do they want to look fancy? Do they want to look fun? Do they want to look understated? So you really kind of have to ask a lot of questions about where they're going before you just go on that mission. Yes, it is easy to buy someone a stellar outfit and have it look good, but at the end of the day, is it really them? And does it mean a lot to them? And is it sending the right message? You don't want to send someone to the Met Gala in an amazing tracksuit that could look great somewhere else, but you know, you just need to have the full picture coming together before just diving into the design. Okay, so working off some examples of things that I typically do as a designer day in and day out. I work with a lot of print and digital pieces that rely on all of the assets as kind of spelled out before you. I'm going to take some time to go through step by step some of the pieces that you guys could put into play and hopefully can help you bring your brand together. A couple different elements that go into most graphic assets that will help you kind of rein in that tone and voice to make sure everything stays consistent. So working from the top down, and this is a brand, I didn't work on the branding per se, but I work with them on a pretty consistently basis. It's a German skincare client that has a tone of voice. They came to me with their guidelines, and the task is just to help execute some collateral. So they have set brand guidelines that need to work with, but again, they came to me with all of these things in play. So starting with the logo, for those of you who have designer friends or work with people who are designers, that's amazing because you have a great resource. The logo out of all the pieces we're going to share with you is probably the one that you will definitely need help with tapping into some of those resources to find some guidance. It's hard to execute a mark without really knowing what you're doing or without any professional help. So my tips for you to finding someone or working with someone It's just really making sure that you dive into their personal style before you hire someone to help with your design. Go through people's portfolios, go through their Instagram, go through their social feeds, whatever it is, to get a sense of what kind of textures they use, what colors they use, things like that. If you have a set vision in mind, which hopefully towards the end of this branding exploration and explorations you can do yourself, you'll have an idea of what you're looking for. You'll be able to tweak and refine kind of that idea. So that way when you're searching out a designer, or if you're looking for a certain symbol or icon, you'll know what kind of design or aesthetic you want that to be in. And then moving down to typography, at the end of this doc, I have a list of resources that you guys can use with largely, there's a big portion on typography in there. It's extremely important to pay attention to where you're sourcing your fonts and what different typefaces you can use for your brand. A little trick that I like to use, there's this plugin for Chrome called Font Ninja, which is actually super helpful. So if you're on a website that you like and you know you like the brand and the aesthetic, maybe you just go and it'll kind of, it's a plugin so you can see what fonts different brands are using. So you can start to emulate and bring together some of those pieces. I want to reiterate and I want to bring to importance that copying and borrowing different elements and different pieces from brands that you admire and things that you like aren't bad. It's not, you know, the end of the world to be borrowing typography from a brand and then matching it with colors, as long as it all comes from a place of purpose and a place of reason for you. Eventually over time, you'll start to meld all these different decisions that you're making together and have your own brand come to life through proper documentation. But finding resources and finding what other people are using is a great way to get started. And then moving down to color. Color is really also, again, hugely significant for your brand. If you're lucky, someone can recommend to you a great palette. Again, you can also start to borrow palettes and find things that work well together. Once you start putting these assets into play and start bringing the pieces together, you'll see what works and what doesn't work. But again, if you're working with someone professionally, they should give you all of the codes, all of the swatches, so that way you can produce these elements, print or digitally, seamlessly when possible. Photography, similar to working with a designer on a logo. Thankfully these days to do social media, there's a great resource of being able to find very talented professionals and being able to source through different styles of photography. Just because someone is a photographer might not mean that the way that they shoot things is right for you. So really go through and make sure you look at how their pictures are taken, what kind of, you know, props they're using, what's the lighting that they're using, what subjects they use, look at who they're working with. And then if you can't manage to hire a photographer at this point, there's tons of great stock options. So making sure that you really have a consistent voice and look and feel. I'll go through that a bit more as well, but to make sure that all your stock selections look the same throughout the rest of your brand. And then the last little piece, any graphic assets that you need to kind of pull this all together will also maintain consistency. In this example, it's just button styles, but that could be anything from icons to illustrations to any sort of vector material that's layered on top of your photography and your other assets that are woven into it to tell your bigger picture story is helpful. So making sure that all of the line weights are the same, making sure if you're developing an app that the stroke weights around your buttons are the same, making sure that drop shadows are consistent. I want to, you know, regurgitate the point that consistency isn't boring. It's actually enhancing your brand and making it better. There's tons of time and tons of room for experimentation. You don't have to be creative in every single large element of what your brand is, but getting kind of down to the fine-tuned pieces and being able to represent that well is more important. So for example, with this exercise, the task was to work on a post for Mother's Day. So everything from the language to the way that the type was aligned and things like that was decided upon. And then searching different images based off of their photography recommendations came together through part of the creativity. But you don't have to rethink the wheel every single time. Okay, so this is a small example of how, if you're working with a designer, definitely ask for them to send you a brand guidelines at the end of your logo exploration or branding exploration, if they're not planning on doing that already. It will spell out exactly how they're thinking about your brand living beyond just the few materials that you worked on together. So hopefully you can take them and run with them and start producing your own materials, or if eventually hire someone else to keep producing these materials, and they will look consistent and look the same over time. This particular brand was one that I worked with. They had their identity established, so coming to me with a few fonts, a few colors, but the question was, how do we use our photography and social? So starting to explore different photography mood boards and looking for inspiration. So again, once you hire that photographer down the road, you're able to give them an example of what you're looking for, and they'll be able to execute that pretty seamlessly. Okay, so now I'm going to take you through a quick example of one branding project in particular that I got to work on with the founder from start to finish. And then she was able to take it and run with it from there, hiring out various people to execute the project and bring her vision truly to life the way that she envisioned it. It all stemmed from, again, that question of, she didn't just hand me her credit card and say, go shopping for me. We had a long conversation about who she was, what she wanted to achieve, how she wanted to look, how she wanted people to feel at the end of the day, which is a big part of what went into it from the beginning. Flip through to the next. The client in particular is a candle company rooted in storytelling. So it was a founder who came to me early on. She had a vision, she had a product, she had a small audience in place, she had people purchasing her product, and she had a story to tell. Her story was that she was a burnt out, stressed out CEO who needed a relief from her day job, started making candles, selling the candles along with her story. So telling people, a little bit about her. And everything was rooted from her home in Louisiana. So all the scents reminded her of home, which brought us to this bigger picture concept throughout our conversations of who she was and how she wanted other people to share her story. And her bigger message was making sure that other people could relate to what she was saying and share their stories as well. So her bigger branding piece, yes, we were working on candles first and foremost, but at the end of the day, we were really working on how do we get people to be vulnerable with each other, and how do we get people to share a little bit about themselves through something as simple as a scent, which is a hard task in the first place. So when you're working on your own personal brand, really think about your journey and your story and what you're trying to tell and how you make a difference in people's lives and what it is that you're really trying to achieve. If you have that deeper meaning story that comes with your purpose, then root that into what you're trying to say. And we were working on the very foundation of her visual branding. So that started out with looking at a lot of inspiration and coming out with some images that reminded her of things that she wanted to emulate through her brand. So since we focused on storytelling, we looked at images of newspapers and texts that, came from print foundries. And since she was from the marsh, looking at things that had softer sand-like textures and tactile qualities and handwritten notes, things like that, that kind of evoked a sense of sharing and openness that she was looking to get when she produced the line. So this is where we start to iterate. So if you're working on this on your own, if you're starting to build your own brand identity, my number one piece of advice to you would be start to iterate and start to create versions of this in situation as soon as possible. So yes, you're going to need to take the time to explore different typefaces, explore what different logos can look like, but the worst case scenario is that you spend 100 hours working on some very intricate design, only to find at the end of the day that that tiny little intricate design is way too complex to fit on a business card, which is the number one thing that you'll need if that's how you're presenting yourself. Or if the typeface that you're selecting looks beautiful on a piece of paper, but doesn't really fit well in an app, that's kind of a bad thing to discover further down the road. So if you're working with someone, ask them to put it into situation as soon as possible so you can see it come to life very early on before you start spending money on production, before you start hiring developers. You want to create some quick mock-ups to see if things are working. So in this case, we were working on the end product was candles and a bit of social. So you'll see some examples of how we kind of worked through some of those pieces early on to make sure that those were working well. So some of the decision making also from the mood board came from deciding that, okay, so she wants to tell stories. We're finding inspiration from paper brands and from things like that, from print foundries. So making sure that everything looks like it has that same kind of tactile print quality, handwritten notes, sourcing fonts that look like that were inspired by some of the things that you find. So again, taking inspiration from maybe those typefaces you found through those websites that you liked, and then applying that to your own personal style. Okay, so this is where we get into a little bit of refinement, taking those ideas and concepts, putting them to the test, showing everyone early on, maybe not everyone, because too many opinions can start to ruin the batch, but start to really look, take a step away, you know, go take a walk, go take a week away from your project and come back and see if this is really what you want to be doing and how you want things to look. From there, hopefully you'll get some clarity and you can start to refine and make some decisions based off of the exploration that you've gone through. So in India's case, that's the name of the founder. We were working on some color explorations. We understood that maybe black and white wasn't enough for the brand. So starting to weave in, how does color and how does typography start to come into play? So again, at this stage, yes, her end goal is working towards producing candles, but we weren't actually making any candles at this point still. We're still iterating and we're still coming up with concepts and we're seeing if colors work before putting anything to print through mock-ups and through design. You can do this low fidelity in, you know, a Word doc, if that makes sense to you, and send it off to someone else to have them touch it up. But again, just any way you want to put together the pieces sooner than later to see if this works is best case scenario. And then we start getting a little bit into photography. So since the founder's journey was all about storytelling, we brought some of those stories in early on into these kind of like fake ad concepts to make sure those worked alongside any photography that we paired them with. So since the budget was on the lower side, we were looking for stock photography that would work well with the brand. So sourcing images that were anywhere from free to relatively affordable that paired well with the color palette. We looked at the tones and the backgrounds to make sure that they complemented the colors that we were using for the brand itself. So does the packaging, when it's on the website, look like the photography that we had someone shoot or have the stock images be searched for? You want to make sure that all these decisions that you're making early on are going to work well once you start executing. Again, why you're going to want to start iterating early and often. And then bringing into play a little bit of how things could look in social. So do your typefaces align? Do everything, do all your colors work well together when presented in big graphic ways? And then also looking at other brands. So pulling in inspiration from how you may want candles styled if you're shooting them, or whatever your product is styled, if you do have the means to hire a photographer at the end of the day. Bringing in some examples from other people will guide your direction if you decide to shoot this, so you're not making this up on your own, or once you hire someone, you're able to really give them a clear understanding of what it is that you're looking for. And then too, so documentation and writing everything down and making notes of everything you're working on throughout your process is so important to maintaining that consistency. Whether it's you creating this, you know, ways down the line and you're having to go back and say, what was that font I used for that part? Or what was that color I used for that part? having a good reference guide and writing everything down will be super helpful for either you or if you hire someone else to do this for you. If you ask someone, hey, I need help with my pitch deck or a presentation or putting together my app, the first questions once they get into the visual design aspect of things is, all right, what are your colors? What are your fonts? How does this look together? How does this work together? And they're going to need documentation from the get-go to really make those come to life in your brand voice. Otherwise, you don't want people just making up these decisions on their own. It will start looking very inconsistent. So again, it's not boring to have repetition. It's re-enhancing your brand and it's making your brand stronger. So being consistent with all these decisions over time will really bring things to life slowly, but surely it will look like the picture that you've been looking for. All right, so now getting a little bit into execution, which without knowing kind of really what any of you guys are working on can take form in a bunch of different ways. There are tons of local and online resources for finding anyone from, copywriters to developers to printers that can help you. Having a lot of the brand exercises done beforehand. So knowing who you are, knowing what you're saying, knowing, your visual language going into any of these steps will help make that transition totally seamless. So again, now you're at the point where you're at the cash register and you want to, swipe your client's credit card to make sure that they're purchasing the exact outfit that they want. You want them to go home with the exact print that they want. You want this developed to a T as it's been designed. You don't want things kind of going off the rails at this point. So making sure that you have that entire thought process planned out ahead will really seamlessly transition into when you start producing objects and getting things together. So here's some of the examples of what either India, the founder, put together herself through social, the photographer put together based off some visual direction. The social media agency was able to bring together through their exploration with the brand. The printer was able to help collaborate on to make sure that the materials were exactly as we had outlined. And since we had all those things thought through ahead of time, she was able to kind of bring all of those pieces into play pretty seamlessly. And then again, working with people who you recommend, and trust on this will help make that story even better. Having those things outlined from the beginning and then talking with those people you choose to bring into your brand and having a really solid foundation of what you're trying to say will make the execution that much better as well. Okay, so I did put together a list of resources for you guys, things that could help you. These are pieces that I use on a pretty regular basis, and also recommend to clients to use once I hand off the pieces to them to start building. Everything from photography to where to source icons from. Again, the fonts we selected, feel free to screenshot or write down pieces at this point because they're anywhere from free to relatively inexpensive resources that I either recommend or use myself. Anything from if you need help with websites, that's kind of a big task on its own, but diving into any kind of mock-up materials, things like that early on. Envision has great ways to kind of create mood boards through that. So the mood boards that we were talking about, fonts, that's a very, task oriented thing, trying to make sure that you have the right typefaces sourced, either looking at blogs like Typewolf, I reference a lot to see what other brands are using and try to emulate some of those styles, to creating them on my own through Google Fonts or Adobe Typekit are very helpful. If you guys haven't searched Creative Market ever, it has a plethora of mock-up tools you could use to create some of those early version iterations of what you're trying to achieve. And then anything from various inspiration websites that I've looked at for a long time. Dribble's great for graphic assets, Styline for packaging, things like that. Printing kind of can vary the range of what you want to spend, but anything from local printers, if you're in Philadelphia, like Fireball, up to things like Moo is a great resource. All right, that's the summary of everything. And I did go through this a bit quickly at this point. So I didn't even check the chat to see. I can leave it on this page if you guys want to reference any of the resources, but I can't see there's a chat. So at this point, if you guys have any questions about your specific brand, we do still have a bit of time left over. So if there are things you had questions on throughout the presentation that don't make sense, or if you wanted to kind of workshop any of your own brand problems, I'd be happy to chat about those as well. Alex, I don't know if you have a certain way to kind of do any of the Q&A at this point.
So first of all, that was great. Thank you. Before we get to Q&A, one of the things that for those of you who have been here before know this, for those of you who are new, the way we've been doing applause is snaps on camera. Or spirit fingers. Snaps or spirit fingers are both fine. Almost as good as applause. So that was great. Thank you. We do have a couple of questions. And maybe just to make it easy for folks who are tuning in later, I can read some of the questions in. So the first one from Catherine is actually a question that I had while we were listening to as well. The examples with product-based businesses make total sense. Really good examples with the candle company in particular. I'm curious how you adapt, or if things are different when it's a service-based business, or if you have examples of how you would approach, maybe what questions you would ask if it was branding for a service-based business, like a lot of the folks that are here in this community.
Definitely, and I work with a lot of service-based clients on a regular basis. The candle company was just a little bit more of a consumer-facing product that was easier to kind of make an example of. Mm-hmm. Just because you're not a product, and just because you don't have, that tangible thing to hold on to that makes, the story, that beautiful painting, shiny commercial picture, doesn't mean you don't have a story to tell. Everyone has a reason why they're doing what they're doing, and everyone has kind of the means to help people find your niche and find what makes you special in your industry. If, getting really granular and really particular is what helps you, then start diving into that. I work with a lot of small business owners and independent creatives and things like that on making one particular person's name a brand, which is definitely a challenge on working on so-and-so LLC versus the brand name. But there's still things about what you're doing that make you special, and everything from having someone help you typeset your name in a very professional looking way to the colors that you're using on your website and things like that, or taking the time yourself to really just feel like if you want to be more of a, fun, approachable, maybe you work for a lot of social media companies and you want to make sure that you have, you're attracting the types of clients that can get you that engagement. So you want to be a little bit brighter, and you want your photography to be a little bit more inspirational. Maybe you're a law practice and you really want to present yourself as being professional, and you want the tones to be a little bit darker and richer. Look at things that inspire you from within your industry, but then also take the time to look at things outside of what you're doing to see who you want to be. Especially if you are working as an independent person and you're trying to brand yourself, you have full reins about how you want this to be, whether it's your name locked up into a creative monogram that can, or paint the picture and, tie everything together well, to giving yourself a DBA and having your name be something else that's more creative and interesting. There's a lot of ways to kind of spin the story to make yourself just as unique as interesting as any other commercial facing business. I think honestly too, Instagram is a great way to kind of look and see. It's a great way to just see like painted pictures of how people brand themselves all the time these days. If you just look at their feeds, it'll start to kind of like, if you start thinking about yourself as that brand, you'll start to kind of get into that mindset when you're looking at people's pages is, oh, I can, organize these photos this way, or put out this kind of content that way and have the colors look like that. screenshot those and use those as examples and start to create your own, but look at things that could help you as well.
That's great. And this is sort of a sidestep from that, but a related question. I think you had it either on slides or in your discussion. What questions that you're asking clients, either listing them again or if you want to add any others when you're going through that concepting phase. So when you're either interviewing a prospective client, or in this case, if someone was sort of interviewing themselves, what are like top 3 or 4 questions that really lead to useful answers?
Yeah. Honestly, my process, everyone's process is a little bit differently. In the past, I've turned into kind of a listener. I'll get on the phone with someone and have someone just say everything that's going through their head on their business. But general questions are getting them outside of their heads. Getting you outside of what you're doing day in and day out is so hard to do. And it's so easy to get trapped in kind of what you're looking at and in your lens. So I started asking people random questions of, what kind of car would you like to drive if you could drive any car? Or I know you're just working from home right now, but if you can build an office, what would your office look like? Oh, cool. What do the paintings on the wall look like? Where do you see it? Would it be in a city area and things like that? And starting to make things feel more tangible would really get you outside of what you're trying to do day in and day out. If your brand was, a clothing item, who would it be and who would model it? Where would the ads be placed? And trying to just get people out of the picture of what you're doing day in and day out. Take yourself out of the bubble, extract yourself from the problem, and try to just really, dive a little bit deeper. Look at things again outside of what you're doing. You can, even if you are a service-based industry, you don't have to brand yourself that way if you don't want to be that way. So what inspires you? What do you want to be? This is your brand. It's exciting. You should be, excited to produce this at the end of the day.
That's great. I really like the idea of like what kind of car would you drive, or what kind of books are on your shelves and things like that. Sort of almost like I could see that turning into almost like a journaling exercise of sorts, or even if you're not an artistic person, to like sketch or lists and things like that, and then look for patterns in that. It's a really cool idea. I never thought of it that way.
Yep, I was working with, it's a medical billing client out of anything. And it's an office, a remote office. So it's a team of people who are really good at what they're doing, but they need a website, they need a logo, they need business cards, things like that. And so we were going through the same exercise. Like, hey, I know you guys are all, none of you were together, but the entire branding exercise was just an hour of what their fictional office would look like. And through that, we're able to paint a picture of, oh, we want it to be really minimal, and we like really bold colors in the wall. And the one guy was like, oh, I want it to be yellow on this wall. And then you're like, okay, cool. Now we're starting to get the picture of what you want this to be. It's helpful to kind of remove yourself from the scenario a lot.
That's great. I have a question from Anya about sort of the juxtaposition of a brand aesthetic when a new product perhaps doesn't match. So the example here is she has an aesthetic that's very pastel and cutesy, which works when things are consistent, but what happens when the product is different? So she's running an event. The example is, doing a vampire goth event when your brand aesthetic is pastel and cutesy. Would you design with the pastel cutesy? Would you go with goth colors and work something in? How would you solve for that problem?
Yeah, and it sounds like a really fun project without knowing what I'm looking at the question too, and that sounds like a really fun problem to solve. And I can see your hair, you got the pastel hair color too, so I understand where the inspiration's coming from. Make sure that you're, again, like those root things that you have. So if you have fonts that you're using, that's a great way to stay consistent. Make sure that those look the same and they're set the same. So if your name or however it is it's spelled on the top of your website should look just like it looks like on the front of the packaging. You're allowed to iterate and change on different versions of what you're doing. Maybe a good example for you would be looking at like a makeup line or something like that, because it's the same brand, but over time they release different lines and you could still tell where they all came from because they have similar colors. Maybe instead of picking, if you're using, I don't know, without seeing it, you have like a pastel pink and a pastel blue for your main brand, then maybe pick like a darker red and like a darker version of those core colors to kind of stem off of what you're doing. Don't start from scratch is my number one advice. I know that you're coming up with new ideas, new concepts, it's fun, but if you want it to feel like it's from the same brand, then definitely take what you're doing and then evolve on that. don't give up your brand just because you want to have fun. I think that you can have fun within constraints. And actually, sometimes too, you can have more fun when you have a little bit of handcuffs on, because then you're like, okay, I have to use this font that I picked. I have to use something to do with these colors. How do we create, maybe the photography is where you start to go off on a limb. Maybe the textures and the materials that you're using for something in the event start to kind of stem off and go different places, but keep it all within the same core palette, so that way people understand that this is all coming from you. And they're like, hey, where's this other thing? Where's the goth thing coming from? I don't really understand. You don't want anyone asking that question. And make sure if you have a brand mark, if you have a logo, keep that front and center too, so people can understand that as well.
Cool. I like the idea of picking one or two pieces of the brand and saying we're going to keep this. That's a new constraint along with the other stuff. It's really, really good.
Yeah, thank you. I might add vampire fangs to my logo.
There you go.
It's perfect.
Keep the logo the same. Just add a little bit, small little tweaks. It's not a bad thing to keep things looking similar.
Reminds me of like doing like almost like a seasonal decoration on a logo.
Exactly.
That's cool. I got another question from Bon about providing a service which is design program management, but struggling to come up with branding that isn't utilitarian or boring. Mm-hmm. So the question is, how do you, or and I might inject my own, do you work towards more inspiring branding when services on glance don't necessarily feel inspirational?
I argue that there is inspiration in everything. You can't, if you're selling a utilitarian business, if you're selling a product that makes sense to you, like, why are you doing this in the first place? And what's your reason why? And, you're helping people at the end of the day, and the product that you're creating stems from some sort of level of inspiration. You started doing this early on, again, without knowing anything much about your business in particular. Whatever it is that brought you to this point was there for a reason. So start thinking about those feelings and start putting emotions behind everything that you're working on. If you want to be more professional and buttoned up because you want to present yourself in that way where, you're catering to a certain audience, you need to look a certain way, definitely go down that route. But you can still pick things like colors and photography that evoke that kind of sense of true meaning behind everything that you feel proud of. And you want to have that story that you're telling. So pick one little nugget of inspiration that you found super early on. Maybe it was a client story, things like that. And then build on that. So what does that story tell? Like, what does it tell you? Where does it take you? And then start looking at inspiration of, oh, I started working with clients because clients were people and I liked helping them in this industry. Oh, people leads to this kind of photography. And let your mind just be open to whatever it can be. Don't start channeling yourself. And I'm the service-based industry, so I need to look like this service business, and get yourself out of looking at other people that are directly related to you. Again, yes, you don't want to ignore that you need to look somewhat like other people so people understand that you're professional. But if you want to be something other than if you're afraid of looking utilitarian, then look outside of what is in your industry to feel like you're truly inspired by this. Pull things out of places that you wouldn't expect them to, that come from within your meaning, that would inspire you to look at the brand as well. And if you have trouble with that, ask friends, ask colleagues, ask people who you work with, like, what do you think of me? Hey, like, how do you see my business? And start to put together some of those mood boards. I create Pinterest boards with clients all the time just to make sure that we're on the same page and sharing the same kind of inspiration. Maybe share a little bit of that with some of your clients and friends and say, hey, does this imagery work for you? And hey, how does this make you feel? How something makes people feel visually is really the core of what this is. You're just trying to evoke some sort of sense of, hey, this brand is fun. These people are serious. These people are blah, blah, blah. So you want to make sure that whatever it is that you're presenting is presented in a way that you want to say it. And then also that makes people think that about you at the end of the day too.
Great. I've got a question from Catherine about self-branding, and so there's like the difference between branding yourself if when you are the business. Mm-hmm. So branding yourself and the business can obviously be two different things. But then there's also like the channel. So the example she has here is Instagram. Where do you or how do you help people think about the difference between a personal brand and a professional service brand? Are they different? Are they separate? Do they play together? How would you look at that?
Yes, branding yourself similar to branding any industry where people, people don't think like, hey, is this interesting? How do I do this? Like, it's not the product, it's not a soap bubble company, whatever it is that has obvious answers, obvious solutions are tricky. But again, like similar to the previous answer, making sure that it means something to you. If you're coming up with a brand name for yourself, again, too, I probably should have said this earlier on. If you're embarking on any sort of new brand, things like that, do a trademark search the first early on. Google yourself, Google that name, make sure no one else is using that name. If anyone else is using it, steer far away from that because you don't want to get sued down the road. But make sure that you're able to use a different name if you're choosing to brand yourself as something else. And if you're branding yourself as your own name, again, like just because it's you should be something that comes from within, comes from something that inspires you. Look at things that you want to present yourself as and how you think that you should be presented out to the world. Working with someone maybe on developing kind of those core identities, or again, like working through some of these exercises on your own, how you can evoke a certain feeling through you. Do you want to present yourself as, Catherine, I know what you do. So if, like the fun, event planner who can pull together anything. Canva, I refer my clients to that a lot as an easy resource for creating their own Instagram posts. So if you're working on, creating your own types of graphic quote posts or different, testimonials through clients, you can start building together some of these pieces on your own and then putting it out there. Again, for social, I use Planoly, or I recommend that to a lot of clients. They have there's a couple different ones. It's just the one I choose to use, where you can actually create a mock-up feed of what you want your Instagram to look like before you create the Instagram. So you're not putting it out there into the world and then making sure that that looks consistent. I'm not a social media expert, so I can't tell you how to get likes or how to get follows, but how to make it look nice is my first and foremost goal. So just making sure that everything looks the same in the feed. Start playing around. Again, if you're going to use pictures of yourself, maybe do a little exchange. See if you can have a photographer, a local photographer who their work and is familiar with, that you're inspired by their images, and say, hey, I'll plan an event for you or do whatever it is for you in exchange for some pictures, or pay a photographer to take some nice shots of you. Combine that with some images I use Unsplash almost daily for some of my clients. Those are free, royalty-free images you can source online. And they have a great kind of tone to all of them. They're very professional looking for being 100% free to use. Start downloading some of those, put those in with some pictures that are, someone took for you or things that other people took. And then mix that in with some of the graphic elements. So if you're doing this yourself, if you're creating up some mock-ups on Canva, so what colors do you want to use, things like that. And same as the other explorations early on, like iterate on these things. If social is your main way that you want to get this all out and it's your main output, make sure that you're putting all those pieces together in that fake social feed. And so you say, hey, does that really fit right? And maybe it is just putting together kind of that Pinterest inspiration board to see if like, hey, all these pictures work well together. You know what, this doesn't really look right. Similar to the previous question, ask other people. Say, hey, does this look like me? If you're getting really stuck in your head, just shoot it around to other people and get some feedback. It's helpful to kind of iterate early, make it feel like it's real early on, and then start to talk to people about it. Also, conversations spark different types of inspiration. So if you don't do this on your own day in and day out, it could be hard to kind of get stuck in the same rut of thinking the same things. So if you're not asking yourself different types of questions of what would my dream office look like, or how would I be if I was a shoe company, or whatever this is, start just shooting this around to different friends. Say, hey, what do you think of this? What does this make you feel? And then just let them answer the question from there. Like, how does this brand look to you? And if they say, oh, that looks awesome, that looks fun, that looks engaging, or oh, that looks really serious, that looks like you're really professional. If you start getting the feedback that that you want people to respond to, then run with that and keep evolving. It'll manifest itself over time too, but try to play around with a lot of this stuff behind the scenes beforehand. It doesn't have to happen overnight. But document those things, like I said, write down what fonts you like and use those same fonts over and over. Write down the color swatches that you like. Colors come with numbers to them, so you can use the same exact shade of pink, blue, whatever it is over time. So make sure that you write those colors down so you can use the same one from app to app. And then as you start to create those concepts, create those mock-ups, you'll say like, that really is starting to nail it. Then you can start to unveil this new design as you wish.
That's great. And I'm going to wrap it up with one more question, which is, what is a common mistake that you see people who are new to branding or branding themselves make that people can and should avoid, and then how would they avoid it?
Yeah, my number one thing is making sure, and I've said this multiple times, so I hope this isn't, beating the point over its head, but just not iterating and not putting things into real context early on is the number one, I think, faux pas you can make when it comes to branding. Countless hours you could spend in developing this intricate, detailed, amazing looking logo that looks great when it's black and white and this big on a piece of paper might look horrible when it's actually printed out on some tiny little stamp or however it is you need to execute it. So test your things out as soon as you can. If you're making a logo that's going on an app, if your end product is, you're working on a website, you're working on anything digitally, make sure that the colors you can use can be used in digital sources. Make sure that that logo looks good on the app. Does it look good in the app store? Things like that. So test it out where it's going to be as soon as possible so you don't get stuck with actually paying someone to make those things come to life. And you're like, that looks awful when it's printed on that soap label or whatever it is on the side of that shirt. That's the worst thing, is that you do all this work and you get to the end and it just doesn't really come together. So when you're working with a designer, ask them to put it into context as soon as possible. And if you're doing it yourself, then start putting it into mock-ups early on so you know it's going to work.
Fantastic. It was great. Awesome questions from the crowd. Great answers from Liz. One more round of Zoom applause for Liz, if we can. Feels good, doesn't it? This was great, Liz. Thank you. I know Catherine mentioned this in the chat. We will share out the slides because I know there was a lot of really great detail and resources on the slides. Liz has got her email address up here on the screen as well. Where else should people look to find you on the internet, Liz?
Email me at the email address here, hello@llbd.co. My name's pretty consistent across the internet. My Instagram is the same, llbd.co. Same with my URL. It's the exact same, llbd.co. So all of those things you could find me at. You can follow us on the Lunch Club. It's been a bit of a pause since of Corona, but once, restaurants open back up, hopefully I'll see you all back at lunches again. And yeah, that's it, where you could find me. Email me. Once we start chatting, I'm very open with my clients. We text, we call, we chat. We were, in constant contact. So I'm very easy to get a hold of, especially on the internet. So
that's great. I got a couple of quick plugs before we wrap up for the day. The first one is, I mentioned this last week, we do have some pretty kick-ass mugs. Speaking of branding, that we pulled some language from the Philly Freelance Fest back in January. We've got this good work, good pay, good people version. Ooh, that is not in focus. We have a make it better, and what is the third one? Work to live, not live to work. You can find those at phillyfreelance.com/gear, and those do help support us continuing to organize these. But the last two things are upcoming sessions. Next week we're doing something a little bit different. Rather than a lunchtime session, we're going to do a happy hour session. For those of you who hung out at the Philly Freelance Fest, you might have met Tony Lopes. He's an attorney, regional attorney, works with lots of small businesses like ours, and he's going to do, we're calling it Legal Time Happy Hour, because that sounds fun, doesn't it? So Tony is going to be joining us, possibly a couple of his team members as well. A little bit of conversation about contracts and how contracts can actually not just protect you, but help you appear more professional. I think it's part of branding as well, but it's from a completely different perspective. I think you'll find it really interesting and useful, as well as to have an open floor for answering your questions about legal and contracts and things like that. Incorporation, any questions you've got, Tony's going to be here to help, and we're probably going to make that a monthly event. We're going to take one of our lunchtime sessions, do it as a happy hour, and bring in some legal support. And then Catherine's working on something that I'm pretty excited about. bringing together a panel of some of the agencies in the region, some of whom were at the Philly Freelance Fest as well, for a panel about how they are implementing or hiring freelancers now, how that's changed, if it's different, and hopefully have some lessons and insights about how you can potentially be proactive in reaching out to some of the local agencies if you're looking for opportunities and work. As Catherine mentions in the chat, the links to all that stuff is in there. If you do have suggestions for future speakers or topics, we're going to take all these ideas from you. So obviously want to vet them and make sure that they're really good and valuable, as good as everybody that we've had so far. But if you've got somebody that you'd want to see, it doesn't even have to be somebody you know. If it's a wish list, we'll do the work to track them down. But we'll take that. You can email myself, Alex, at indiehall.org with that, and Catherine and I will work together on making that happen. Thanks again to Liz. Thanks to Catherine, as always, for running things behind the scene, making sure things run smoothly. Couldn't do it without her. And thanks to all of you for sharing your lunch hour with us. We're going to end with 1 minute left on the clock and send you all on the rest of your Tuesday. Have a great one, everybody.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Liz.